Hello and
Hello.
welcome back to another episode of the Rebel Talk podcast. I'm your host, Zach Moreth. As always, I'm here with your co-host, Daylan Flowers. We're going to have some fun today, man. We're going to dive in a little bit to our player grades. We're going to go through each position group from the 2024 season. Obviously, another double-digit win year for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels, but, didn't quite exceed expectations of not only making the college football playoffs, but potentially making a national championship run. So there were some things that we want to critique, but also some things that we want to recognize as greatness. So I want to dive right into it, Dalen, and one of those things being quarterback, and my personal grade for the quarterback room, right here, Dalen Flowers, A- for the quarterback room. What you got?
Great minds think alike.
I agree with you, man, and I want to start by giving Jackson Dart all the props in the world. He set the record for total offense and the most passing yards in a season. He threw for over 4,000 yards, rushed for 29 touchdowns. He was the team's second leading rusher, which, we'll get into the running back room later. Jackson Dart was everything that you'd want, except for a couple of the games here that he didn't throw for over 300 yards, which he did not against LSU and Kentucky. And unfortunately, those were both games where the offense kind of needed that extra spark. And that's what prevented me from putting the quarterback room all the way up to an A. And then as well, you look at that Florida loss, Dart throws for 2 interceptions. Should have been 3, if that one did get called back, which, again, it happens. It's part of football. You're going to make mistakes. But all in all, Jackson Dart, he was great. He really built this team. If you think about the intangibles in the offseason, he gathered this elite group of players for the last dance run. And then, in terms of backups, Austin Simmons was electric. The first play that comes to mind is, a couple of those passes against Georgia on 4th down. And he's everything you'd want and more looking at a starting quarterback for next season. But with 3-loss team, I can't quite give the quarterback room an A or an A+. So that's my reason for the A- day.
Yeah, a record-breaking year for Jackson Dart. Passes old Eli Manning for the all-time passing yards this year. I thought that his heart was on display this year. Obviously, could have been better, and I think I will talk a little bit more about that when we go into different groups on the offensive side of the ball. But a historic year, obviously, the first, I think maybe the second game of the season, I can't remember exactly, I think breaks like the school record for the most consecutive passes as well. So I thought Dart had a pretty good year. Obviously, some misconceptions about some of the play he had in a few games this year. Could have been better in the red zone. And I mean, it's weird about quarterbacks. When you do great things, everything goes to you. But when you do bad things, everything goes to you as well. So you got to take the blame. You had to take all the fame as well. So I gave A-. Obviously Austin Simmons is the future is bright, and he came in and showed what he could do in a few SEC games. And I think, in my personal opinion, the most pivotal drive of the season, the most pivotal moment of the season is this drive coming in against Georgia, down 7-0 after the interception, and coming in and taking over that drive and getting a touchdown on that drive. It set up what people saw for the future on a national spotlight. But it was just as important for us having momentum and keeping the momentum in our favor in that Georgia game. It was huge. So I gave it A-. Obviously, there was room to improve in that position, but I thought exceptionally a well job done by the quarterback room. Touchdown to turnover ratio was still at magnificent this year. And I thought we did a great job at balancing how good he could be with his arm and with his legs. So work could have been done. Obviously, we would like a little bit more, but I still give it A-. I thought that quarterback room definitely kind of set the standard for going forward or what a quarterback needs to be at Ole Miss.
Absolutely, man. And, staying on the offensive side of the ball, are you queued up for running back or wide receiver, Dylan?
I'm queued up for running back.
All right, man. This should be interesting. A big old C. What you got?
I got C+.
Yeah, look, we all know what happened in the running back room, but it's worth
the weirdest times in throughout Ole Miss, my personal Ole Miss history, might I add.
You make a great point. I think if you told me that Ulysses Bentley, who Ole Miss social media made this very public, he was the highest graded returning SEC running back. If you told me he was going to have the 3rd most rushing yards on this year's team, I'd tell you that you're absolutely insane. And I was doing some research early and just a stat for the listeners here. Henry Parrish, he took his last snap in the first half of Arkansas.
Yep.
He led the team in rushing yards by over 180 yards, with the second leading rusher being Jackson Dart. That that's a problem. It's a glaring problem. We've hammered this all year long. Every Ole Miss fan has been saying this as loud as possible. But how the hell does Ulysses Bentley not get more carries and find more time on the field? Especially, he finally plays against LSU after people are begging, and he breaks off a 50-yard touchdown run. And then to cap off the season, which I thought was beautiful against Mississippi State,
Yep.
Bentley cracks off that 89-yard run, ends up getting a touchdown in the Gator Bowl against Duke. So shout out to Bentley. He gets all his flowers. But I just don't understand it. And the last thing I'll say here is that Ulysses Bentley finished with less carries this year than when Quinshon Judkins was here. How does that happen? We don't have a Quinshon Judkins in 2024, but Bentley still got less carries when Judkins was here. I can't comprehend it. I'm praying to God, they start to figure things out, getting some new players here with Logan Diggs, Shakai Mills-Knight, and whoever else slides into that room in 2025. But this is easily going to be one of my lowest grades. At the same time, I don't want to go lower than a C because I think we have to remember that this team is a double-digit win team, and at times the ground game was effective. I mentioned against LSU, Bentley cracks off a massive run. I thought Bentley scoring that opening touchdown against Georgia. There were times when it flashed here and there, but overall, I'm sticking with a C, Dylan.
Yeah, so I gave a C plus, and I think I'm more frustrated throughout the situation with the running back room with the way the coaching handled it. You look at the
Yes.
Florida game, and mind you, I'm not frustrated. I'm not upset by losing to Florida. I thought DJ Lagley came in at that time. Florida was surging, and Florida just looked really hot at the end of the year. And Billy Napier kind of kicked it into a different gear, but. But Ulysses Bentley doesn't get one carry, and we see Micah Davis get majority of the running back carries against Florida. That's why I give a C plus, even though that's not necessarily the running back room's fault. It's just like, what are we doing? It's the situational awareness is horrible. We a lot of fans and myself included, they talk about the scheme, and we ran the same scheme that we had when Quinshon Judkins was here, and I get the frustration with that. But I will say as well, when we saw consistent use of Ulysses Bentley, like Zach just said, we put him in against LSU, and at that time, it's the longest touchdown run for us in the season. And then we same scheme against Mississippi State, and he goes off for an 89-yard touchdown. When we consistently gave him the ball, there was opportunities that was given to him. He saw the gaps really well, and he used what he used best, which is his feet and his elusiveness, to be really good. So it's just frustrating the way the situation was handled. Not necessarily, I would say, the result of the players. I thought Dominique Thomas came in and played a little bit of a vital role. And again, like the situational awareness, I thought Henry Parrish had a pretty decent year, but there were times where I thought, maybe a Dominique Thomas or Ulysses Bentley or even a Rashad Amos could be back there in a 5-out set when we know we're going to throw the ball, etc., or on a play action pay, but we have small Henry Parrish back there trying to block for Jackson Dart, and that's not going to work. So I gave a C plus, obviously room for improvement, and I think my biggest key for this as well. People from the outside looking in think Lane Kiffin and think offense, and they think pass, 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 and that's what we saw this year, and that's why this offense was lackluster. And that's not the way a Lane Kiffin offense effectively moves. You have to have an effective run game. I don't care if you're a Lane Kiffin. I don't care if you're Lincoln Riley. I don't care who you are. When you're the offensive guy, you have running game that is a really effective, hits the gaps well, can get you 5 or 6 yards per carry, and guys that can help you get in the end zone when you're in that area. We didn't do that this year. And it's a simple fact of that's why I believe this offense was lackluster. We didn't have an effective run game, and that cannot move forward in the future with Austin Simmons, whoever comes after Austin Simmons in the future, with any team that Ole Miss has, because if you don't have an effective run game, your offense is not going to be able to move with a great motion.
No, and we're going to move out wide here into the wide receiver room, but at times, the inability to run the ball completely hindered the wide receiving ability to move the ball down the field and get catches, especially in those losses. So, with that being said, without further ado, Dalen, wide receiver room gets a B
Ooh.
plus.
I'm going
All
A
right.
plus C. This is where you get the differences on mine here.
good. This is good. And I want to start. Trey Harris led the SEC in receiving yards, and he
Mhm.
played 8 games. He recorded stats in 8 games this year, and you shouldn't even count. I mean, I guess you can count the Florida game because of the
Yeah.
touchdown, but he gets pulled early. That to me, as incredible as it is a problem, Dalen.
You're
When when
correct.
when Trey Harris was in the game, let's all go back to this beautiful night in Baton Rouge, right? Jackson Dart seemingly only throwing the ball to Trey Harris, which worked for a little bit. But then when Trey Harris left that game, I understand Caden Lee got some targets, but the offense couldn't do anything. The second half offense of that game was terrible, in my opinion, and it's exactly what cost you the game because the defense can only hold LSU at home for so long. Now, on the flip side, you have to also understand that these wide receivers did a fantastic job with, Caden Lee, Jordan Watkins, Juice Wells. They all caught for over 500 yards. And
Mhm.
when Trey Harris left, they were phenomenal. And there's no question in my mind about that. But against Florida, same type of situation as LSU. Trey Harris leaves the game, and Jackson Dart can't find an open man to save his life. Now, was he getting pressured? Was the offensive line not doing a great job? Yes, yes, and yes against LSU and Florida. But, the scheme was completely blown up the second Trey Harris left the game. And I don't know what happened because it was very effective against teams like Arkansas and in that second half, Oklahoma and even Georgia. And that didn't happen when it mattered the most on the road to Florida when your season's on the line. And in a night game in Death Valley, which, I completely think that Ole Miss should have won. But again, I want to go back. Jordan Watkins catches for over 250 yards against Arkansas. Like there were great moments, but again, the team loses 3 games, and a lot of that does fall in the wide receiver room. And Jackson Darts, he wasn't able to get the ball to them when it needed it the most. So that's why I can't quite give him an A, but I do understand. I completely understand it. The wide receiving room was incredible and made a lot of history this year. So I'll finish with that, Dale.
I went A+ for a few reasons, and here's why. I first of all, Caden Lee. I mean, I watched him in the ULM game last year, and I'm like, okay, this kid looks pretty good. Then we see him in the Peach Bowl. I'm like, okay, he looks better than I thought he's going to be. His ability to be a pass blocker, to be a great route runner, to have great hands, to have great yards after catch. His effectiveness in seeing the end zone, I thought was exceptional. Even like when we talk about Austin Simmons coming in Georgia, he was vital in that drive. He was vital in the Georgia game. I thought Kane Lee had a magnificent year, and he won't get any awards, and his numbers may not show that he was a really good wide receiver, and he played a pivotal role this year. But if you watch the games, I mean, my goodness, the kid coming off last year for the limited role that he had, you wouldn't expect him to be like he did, play like he played this year. So that was a big key. And I love your point about Trey Harris. Obviously record breaking numbers, and who knows what would have happened if he was healthy the whole year and what numbers he would have broken. Probably would have even been in New York for the conversation for a Heisman Trophy winner. But I think that's a generational guy, and like you said, wasn't necessarily happy with the continued use of him and just kind of the one-dimensional offense we had when he was healthy and 100% with him. But I can't take away what he did and the exceptional catches he made this year, the exceptional numbers he put up this year. I mean, we lose that LSU game, and you can kind of talk about that first drive. He drops that wide open deep pass, and maybe that changes the game for us. But he also has a ridiculous touchdown catch down in the end zone where the student section is at LSU, which puts us up big at that time. And provides us momentum in Florida as well. I think his legacy helps Ole Miss moving forward in terms of recruiting wide receivers in the transfer portal. I think guys like him, Jordan Watkins, they see recruits, transfer portal recruits see what transfer guys like them have done here, and they're like, okay, I can do the same thing at Ole Miss. And like Jordan Watkins, a bumpy year, but he dealt with so many injuries this year, especially at the start of the season. And for him to come out there to torch Arkansas like he did, now mind you, at that time, Travis Williams defense, that week before they gave him a lot to State, but I still thought Jeff Lebby did a decent offensive job this year. But Travis Williams had that defense ready and rolling. I think Hudson Clark had a poor day for Arkansas that year, but that defense was still rolling, and Jordan Watkins torched them every single play. I mean, it wasn't even close. So I thought he cemented himself this year, especially in the later part of the season, and his legacy was cemented. So I thought those three guys were exceptional. Juice Wells was a highly touted guy coming in here. And I just personally speaking, don't think he lived up to what he was meant to do here. But I will say this as well, and this goes back to the running back room. I don't think the coaching staff used him effectively, and I'm tying this into the tight ends as well. I'm literally so excited to see Daquan Wright next year. What Daquan Wright did in the Gator Bowl was equivalent to what Caden Prieskorn did in the Peach Bowl last year for Ole Miss, in my opinion. So I say that because I don't think Juice Wells was effectively used correctly this year, and that sucked really bad because I thought he could do really good things. But there were times where he missed a lot of catches that I thought you should be bringing in, and that'll be bringing 7 points to this offense and to this team. So that played into my factor, but I was still giving an A+. I still thought the wide receiver room was exceptional this year. And like you said, there were times where guys had opportunities like Caden Prieskorn. One of the big moments of the season for me is Jackson Dart throwing the interception against LSU. Three guys, he underthrows Caden Lee, and he gets the ball picked off. And you go back and watch it, and Caden Prieskorn is just standing on the left side of the field with open turf wide open. And it's like, we have that, and it just wasn't utilized, whether that's due to quarterback play, whether that's due to the coaching staff, whether that's due to a lack of confidence for ultimate reasons of when Trey Harris goes out. I don't know, but I'm still giving it an A+. I thought that was kind of the beacon part of the offense this year, and I'm really proud of the wide receiver room for continuing to move forward like they did. And I'll go Micah Davis as well. He had a decent year, and I thought that even though we didn't know what we were doing with him at times, I still thought that Micah Davis played a pretty exceptional role this year.
Micah Davis, everyone's favorite running back. All right, Dale, you mentioned Daquan Wright and Caden Prieskorn. So I want to focus here on the tight end room, get my grade ready to go. And before I show it, this isn't a reflection of the talent that was in the room. This is a direct reflection of the play calling and the scheme and how underutilized these guys were, especially with my grade. So I'm holding it up here. Tight end room, I'm giving you a B+. Or excuse me, B-. Sorry. Wanted to give you a B+. I just don't really think that they were utilized in the right way. Thank you, Daylan. There we go.
I wasn't prepared.
No, you're good, dude. But listen, man, Caden Prieskorn is an NFL tight end if I've ever seen one. The guy blocks at an elite level. And, we've seen what he can do, whether it be in the Peach Bowl or one of those games where he actually gets utilized. And he's an absolute beast over the middle of the field. But that didn't happen. And Daquan Wright, I don't think many fans knew his name until 4 or 5 games into the season.
Literally.
And I don't – if it's scheme, if it was Trey Harris getting every single target, it was a problem. And it has nothing to do with the players. I want to make that clear. But Caden Prieskorn's a guy who needs at least three receptions every game. And there were 7 games when he caught 2 passes or less. That is not good. That's not good, man. Especially for Caden, the guy who's looking to boost his draft stock, probably didn't get the most of what he wanted to, working in this offense next year, which I didn't even think was a reality. If you go watch his Peach Bowl performance, myself included, the Ole Miss fans are thinking, wow, this guy, he's going to have a Brock Bowers type of year. He's going to be just a crucial player for this offense. And then Daquan Wright comes to life, man. He's a menace. He's averaging over 14 yards per catch on the stat sheet. And we saw exactly what he did against Duke. This guy should take the next step next year. But will he? I don't know, because Prieskorn wasn't able to do that. And that's why I can't go B+ or A, which I really wish we could, Dalen.
Yeah, like you said, I just thought it was another, and this is the sucky part, the coaching staff, and just no utilization of these guys. One huge thing for me with the Titans this year, It worked. It worked sometimes, and sometimes I'm just thinking, what are we doing? But using our tight ends as X slot receivers, I don't know an obvious percentage, but maybe 75% of the time this season infuriated me. If I'm being honest, it really did, and it just didn't make sense. And I thought that was another beacon of why our run game this year struggled because our tight ends were on the sidelines instead of on the line of scrimmage when we have two huge guys that can help in the run blocking or the pass
Yeah,
blocking game as well sometimes. But I thought Caden Prescore came to life in clutch moments. You think about the deep ball catch against Kentucky that obviously we end up losing that game, but he kind of puts us in field goal position. The big catch against Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl. I thought Caden just kind of kept his head on his shoulders really well this year, and despite the lack of involvement, he still played with his heart every weekend. And I love Caden. He's a good, quiet guy that just is gone about his business really well. And I wish the best for him. I think he's going to be one of the steals of the NFL draft. Whichever team ends up getting him, they're going to get a guy that's really good at all three levels, can make any catch, a really good size tight end as well with decent speed, and understands the game really well. So I wish the best for Caden. I hate that this year he was not used correctly, unfortunately. But like I said about Daquan Wright, and you brought up a good point. Like you said, I don't think a lot of people knew who he was after the non-conference first four games, and that sucks because he had limited catches. I think he had maybe one or two touchdowns throughout the first four non-conference games. But the guy's a beast. I mean, he can move pretty well for his size. He's huge,
yeah.
has great hands, can make a lot of end zone plays. And I thought he was just kind of cool, calm, and collected throughout the entire season. And he transfers from Virginia Tech for a reason. And I thought that added depth to our tight end room coming into the season, and now he's going to be the main guy with Luke Hass next year. So I'm excited. Like I'm genuinely so excited to see Daquan Wright. Let's utilize him correctly moving forward. I really hope 2024 was just a learning experience for the coaching staff, and that we move forward with how the game plan is now being moved, because the tight ends are just as effective as any position on this group. When we have a good tight end room, we move well. The middle of the field is utilized really well, and that moves our offense up the field really well. So we will see what Ole Miss is able to do with those two guys at tight end next year, and I'm excited. I think Daquan Wright has a lot of uphill potential.
I completely agree with you, Dalen. And the last offensive group I want to touch up on here, the offensive line, the Glaciers up front. They had flashes when they were really good and also flashes when they were really bad. I don't say that lightly because, we'll get into it, but Jackson Dart got sacked in a lot of key moments. So we'll get into that, but I'm giving him O-line. There we go. C plus. Dalen's giving it a C minus. Look, the reason I don't go below the running back room here is because of what Jackson Dart was able to do. It's not a normal year that when your quarterback throws for over 4,000 yards. And Jackson Dart, despite getting sacked 28 times, he was able to do that, and he was allowed to do that when he was not under pressure. You look at that Arkansas game, even the Georgia game. He had time to go through his progressions, go through his reads,
Yes.
make the correct play. Now, Dart got sacked 4 or more times in 3 games this season, Dalen. Do you want to guess what games those were?
Uh,
Yeah,
let me think. Maybe Kentucky, LSU, Florida, maybe.
exactly. Every 3 game that Ole Miss lost, Dart was sacked 4 or more times. So there's a direct correlation there. When Dart's under pressure and running around for his life the entire game, he can't go through his reads, and that's when he's at his worst, like most quarterbacks are. It makes sense. But when he has a clean pocket, he's throwing for over 500 yards against Arkansas, and he commands the offense against South Carolina, even in a game when he doesn't have as many passing yards. He's able to, okay, let's take a breath. Let's run the offense in a correct fashion. And unfortunately, in the games that he lost, especially on the road in hostile environments, that's when communication up front was the worst, and it just didn't end well. And then the last thing I'll touch on is this was the least amount of rushing yards produced on a Lane Kiffin team at Ole Miss. So, it's not great. It's really not great. And there's definitely some problems, some holes that need to be fixed up front. I think the Rebs have acquired maybe 3 offensive linemen in the transfer portal. But look, you need as much depth as possible. and more so talent because this Ole Miss team did have a lot of depth up front, and sometimes it didn't even matter because of how good the opposing defensive lines were. It's a difficult situation, but I'm getting a C plus, and that's all I got there.
I'm kind of regretting what I put. I kind of wish I would have went C or C plus, and here's why. Obviously, it was a down year for the offensive line and John Garrison, but we dealt with a lot of injuries. I've talked about this so much. I'm huge on Jaden Williams. He's from the state of Arkansas. I watched him a lot in high school. I think he played one or two games, but dealt with the entire injury bug throughout the entire season. We saw Reese McIntyre be out of a lot of games throughout the season as well. Don't get me wrong, that is what you get depth for, and which we had, and it was still lackluster.
Yeah.
But I do commend the guys for still trying to play their hearts out. But my big thing is that Zach talked about what he talked about, but I watched a lot of guys, and I hate to call him out because I love Micah Pettis, but just a lot of unacceptable penalties this year, and it was just poor. And for Michael Pettis to be an experienced guy like he was, and a starter for so many years here like he was, especially in that egg bowl. I mean, just it felt like it was holding on number 57 like 4 straight times in the egg bowl, and it just happened so much throughout the season, and it put us in so many regimes. You think the LSU game in the red zone for overtime, and we get pushed back because of a holding call. And I mean, whether we end up, well, I can't play hypotheticals anymore. But that's significant. Like it really is. Penalties matter. In those environments, at Baton Rouge, at night, that matters. It really does. And it wasn't just Micah. I watched a collection of guys, Nate Kalepo, Julius Buelow, do the same thing throughout the season. And they were highly touted guys coming in from Washington. And I thought they just could have played better. But they didn't, and that's honestly okay. Being the offensive line is probably one of the most complex positions on the football field, and they require so much. But I just thought they could be better this year. Simple put is that. I watched a lot of guys miss defenders on reads, double guys that didn't need to be doubled, allowing for one guy to be getting into the end zone. I thought situational awareness was horrible by the coaching staff in the red zone for our offensive line as well. So I think there's a lot to talk about for the offensive line, but here's the thing. If this was not a bigger learning experience for anybody, it has to be for John Garrison.
Has to be.
I really think that he has to get it together this offseason and this upcoming season now, or I don't know if he will be having a job at Ole Miss next year. And because it matters, the offensive line matters. We go back to Georgia 2023, getting blown out of Athens. The line of scrimmage matters. Defensive line, offensive line, it matters. And we had the talent and depth regardless of the injuries, but I just didn't see a consistency level of it from it this year. But like Zach said, I watched the Georgia game and they played almost a perfect game. I watched the Arkansas game and they played a perfect game. So, I thought the offensive line was frustrating but questionable. My call out for the offensive line for the upcoming 2025 season is this: from game one to the last game, can you be consistent? I watched them this year. I remember last year. Remember last year, those first couple of games until I think the Georgia Tech game and even the Alabama game, they struggled. But after that, they kind of got it together. The
Yes.
offensive line struggled really bad, really poorly. Quinshon Jenkins could not get going until the LSU game consistently. And I really thought it was big on the offensive line. So I'm looking for consistency in 2025. How can the offensive line be consistent on all three levels? Understanding what Austin Simmons does really good. And this will be my last point. I will give them just kind of a reconciliation for them, because when you're running the offense that we run, RPO offense, and how fast Ole Miss runs and moves up the field, it's not easy. And I understand that it's not easy to be the offensive line in this type of system and the way that we play, and especially with Jackson Dart moving around as much as he did and using his legs so much and kind of trying to evade the pocket sometimes and ends up sometimes just going into sacks. So I will say that that's a huge part as well. And the system that we run, it's not necessarily that easy to be a great offensive lineman. So I will give them the whole and hard on that. It's definitely not easy to play offensive line in this system. It's not easy to play offensive line in general, but in this system, I think it makes it even harder the way we move with momentum and tempo. So it's going to be a big offseason, a big year for John Garrison. I think he has a lot of pressure on his shoulders for the upcoming season.
Yeah, in my opinion, this is a make or break year for Garrison. Just like you said, Dalen. But it's going to prove if he's still employed with the university moving into next year. So I want to transition to the other side of the ball. Ball here, Dalen. More exciting group. A group that constantly revamped Ole Miss, and a group that's going to get a lot of good grades. And I want to start up front with the big boys. This is a position group striking lightning in a bottle. Yep, A and an A plus, man. We might need to hold it up a little longer. These boys need some respect, eh? Yeah, I thank you. Prince Umamielen and Sunterian Perkins, they're top 10 in the country with sacks, both finishing with 10 and a half. Ole Miss defensive line is second in the nation in sacks, finishing with 55. And then you just look at the glue guys in the middle and around the perimeter: Jared Ivey, JJ Pegues, Walter Nolan, who everyone said was this big crybaby who couldn't handle himself, comes in and he's an absolute dog. He's locked in. He doesn't cause any sort of trouble throughout the season. I expect all of these players to go in the first, second, and third rounds of the NFL draft. And then looking at their actual gameplay, in addition to the sacks, there wasn't a single team that could run the ball except Florida, who did a little bit with their counters. But Ole Miss is fourth in the country in run defense, allowing 44 rushing yards per game. It's just silly. It's stuff that doesn't happen. And it's a credit to Pete Golding and Randall Joyner for acquiring these guys, but also developing them. Jared Ivey started his career at an ACC school at
Yeah.
Georgia Tech, and he comes to Ole Miss, puts on some weight. They use him as a nose. They use him in the nose position. They use him in the edge. This guy is now a versatile weapon who's going to be very effective in the NFL. And it's a credit to the coaching staff and the work ethic there. But there's no question in my mind that this was the highlight of this Ole Miss team, Dave.
Yeah, coming off the 2023 season, I thought that how do you kind of replace Cedric Johnson and Isaac Ukuku, who were two vital pieces
Yeah,
to the defensive line last year? And we did it, and I think for me, this is the part that sucks the most about this year is that you can recruit and have a great transfer portal that like you can like we will going forward, but you can't replicate this defensive line. It's impossible coming back with the talent that we already had in terms of Jared Ivey, Xavier Harris, and JJ Pegues, and then adding, like you said, I think two first, second round draft picks with Walter Nolan and Prince Miamami Yellen. It was just a joy to sit back and watch them this year. And my player of the season, in my personal opinion, was Prince Umamielen. I simply enjoyed him. Just on third downs, a monster, one-on-one coverage, using his hands, using his feet, using his quickness. I truly didn't believe there was an offensive lineman in the country that could stop him. And for me, there's so many things we could talk about the LSU game, but I think on fourth down on that last drive, if Princely Mamielin is healthy, instead of rushing three and having Princely out there, I think we get to the backfield and we sack Garrett Nussmeyer and we go back to Oxford with a huge win against LSU at that time. But it was still fun. It was generational to watch. It was generational to watch what Randall Joyner did, what Pete Golding did, and the schemes that they made for this defensive line for every single player to excel. And I think it's going to only benefit us moving forward with transfer guys, but this incoming, season, a lot of these guys, Cam Franklin, William Echoes, a lot of those freshmen this year that sat back, played a little bit, watched these guys in practice, learn from these guys in practice, help and watch a lot of film with these guys. It will help them be even greater. And so I give my props to the defensive line this year. They deserve nothing but their flowers. I hope nothing but success in their futures. Because man, it was a true joy to watch them every single Saturday, man. It was so fun.
spot on, man. It just lightning in a bottle with that group that you might never have again, whether it's at Ole Miss, but that's a special group right there. And along those lines, talking about the linebackers, the cleanup crew of the defense, I'm staying on a very similar note here with Poop Hall and TJ Dottery, just very special players. Yep, linebacker room, incredible, incredible. In this is man, Poop Hall, just the impact this guy brought. I didn't know much about him coming over from Arkansas. And quickly, a couple games into the season, he made his mark on Ole Miss, just being a leader, being a veteran in that room. His father on Twitter, who's just an absolute legend. Shout out to Pooh Paul's dad, constantly pulling for the Rebs. But these are guys who led the team in tackles. They both had more than 70 total tackles, combined for 5.5 sacks, 5 deflected passes, and more importantly, energy, leadership, and organization. In the student session watching these games, they're constantly shifting over defensive linemen, talking to each other, tapping on their helmets, changing the play. It's special what they did, and to have TJ back for next year, hope he doesn't transfer, but he should have TJ back for next year. It's going to make for another incredible linebacker room that's full of new transfers. But his leadership and his presence, TJ wearing the mic and being able to translate all these signals, and then Pooh Paul just being a disruptor, just everywhere. It felt like every play he was there, every play he was involved in, hitting hard and hitting fast. So just shout out to the linebacker room. Easily an A, and they were another huge reason why the Ole Miss run defense was probably the best in the country, Dalen.
Yeah, Chris Paul Jr., TJ Daughtery, Sunterian Perkins, Kari
Yeah.
Coleman. Uh, I thought they played exceptional all year long. Starting Chris Paul, I was very familiar with him, just my ties with Arkansas. I was so excited and I raved about him all last offseason about him coming to Ole Miss. Man, I can't even describe him, man. He was a guy that, for me personally, watching him, he would come into the game sometimes. He would just immediately come in and lift his arms up, trying to hype the
Yeah.
crowd. That's what you need from a guy. He's a guy that gave 200% every play. You could tell he just built such a leadership role in the locker room and on the field for this defense, and the guys played off the way the energy that he gave. Just a straight dog. And it was so fun to watch him play this year. I hate that he's not going to be back, but I still obviously wish the best for him. I know he has to do what's best for him. But it was super fun to watch him play in this Ole Miss jersey. I thought that he was vital in what we did. Had a few interceptions this year as well. Just an overall great player. Sunterian Perkins, man, oh man, just a sophomore this past season, and who knows what he's going to be able to do next year. Almost broke the Ole Miss single season sack record. Just watching him, his elevation, his development over the last 2 years has been phenomenal. The way that he can play on the edge, his quickness, his ability to use his hands to move offensive linemen out the way. It's incredible. His athleticism is incredible. This dude is going to be a phenomenal NFL player one day for the right team and the right system. So I couldn't give my props enough to him. I thought TJ Daughtery had a great year as well. We didn't know much about him coming into this year. We saw him in the Peach Bowl last year, really for the first time on this team, in his kind of role. And I thought he played a good year, especially in zone coverage and dropping back and helping the secondary. And I thought Kari Coleman played a great role as well. Kari Coleman will not get his flowers a lot from people that look at the numbers, but I thought Kari Coleman was just as vital to the linebacker room as any of those other three guys that I just named. Came in a lot, especially on third down, and helped drop back in coverage, helped stop the run game, help stop the short passes from opposing offenses. And I want to give my flowers to Kari Coleman, a guy that had been here for a little while and understood what the role and the system was for him. It kind of had to step back because of the talent in that room, but still play an exceptional role this season. And I just really happy that Kari Coleman had a great year.
Yeah, this was such a special group, between the linebackers and the defensive lineup and that front seven. So I want to drop back a little bit, moving into the DBs and safeties. I explained to Dalen, at the rate that Pete Golding switches around these players, whether it's John Saunders, Trey Washington, you see him in press coverage. You also see him playing safety. Jaden Kennedy moved around a bunch.
Yeah.
Grouped him into one for the secondary. Here's my grade popping up on the screen here. I'm going B, Dalen. I like A minus though, and I'll tell you what, it was difficult because
this was my most difficult grading.
Yeah, because you do have to think about if the defensive line and the linebacker group weren't as elite as they were, I would consider giving the DBs a better grade, but they played with such good talent in front of them, and I think it made it difficult at times, and it highlighted that there were some struggles, especially early on in the season. I don't know if you remember this, Dalen, but Trey Amos played a horrible game against Kentucky. it was holding calls. It was pass interferences on third down.
Yep.
This, that, and the other thing. Fans did not like Trey Amos after Kentucky. Fast forward a couple months here in January, that might be maybe one or two players who's going to get drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. And Trey Amos turned himself into a next level product. I can't remember the time when I heard about an Ole Miss DB who was able to go to the NFL and play immediately. You know, you're looking at a guy who could compete for a starting role next year in the National Football League. I mean, how often does that happen? And the reason I can't quite give him an A staying on that same level is because Brock Vandegrift threw for over 200 yards twice this season, and one of them was against Ohio, and the other was against Ole Miss.
Mhm.
Brock Vandegrift is now retired, probably taking on a business job of some sort, and he came into the vault. It absolutely won them that game. So I can't give the secondary, as much flowers as I would like as the defensive line, the linebackers. But some of the positives I want to recap were that interception Saunders had against Georgia, allowing the defensive line to get home and then playing the tip that Jared Ivey had. And in must-win games like South Carolina, they limited Lenore Sellers to 162 passing yards. If you guys remember, I was covering that game at South Carolina. Vibes were low. We're coming off a loss to Kentucky, and the mindset is if you lose this game, you're going to LSU next week, and your season is probably over. And
Yep.
the defense went in there and made an absolute statement. Amos redeemed himself, getting an interception, and then he was lights out the rest of the way. And just such leadership between John Saunders, Trey Washington, Lewis Moore, when he wasn't injured, had a pretty solid year. I thought Kennedy slid into a safety role really nicely after LSU. I think he was
Yes.
mismanaged a little bit. And he
Yes.
was extremely effective after, that happened. And then Amos, can't think of his name, Isaiah Hamilton with the pick six against Duke, finishing off his year nicely. So a lot of replacements that I still think are out there in the transfer portal because you're losing a lot of these players. But all in all, give them the secondary a B.
Yeah, I love what you said. Kind of going piggybacking off that. The moving around was kind of antsy. I thought Jaden Kennedy. Obviously, there are moments where fans are like, okay, this guy is not it, and he's costing us a lot of moments in games. But he moved around a lot. Like he's playing a lot of different roles this year, and that's not comfortable to do, especially when you're playing in the SEC. And when we play such an aggressive defense as well. But I still thought he played manageably well. And one of my big things was you go back to the Egg Bowl. I mean, that offense in the first half was tearing the secondary up. I mean, big pass after big pass after big pass. But they kind of got it together in the red zone, and I kind of thought that was a big thing all season. Even if they allowed a big play, I still thought that the secondary got it together in the red zone pretty well. Obviously, you say Trey Amos, you come in this year not really knowing how much to expect from him, but obviously I expect him to be a first round draft pick this year, one of, if not the best corners to come through Ole Miss. And one of my first personal favorite players, John Saunders Jr. this year, just a low key guy that worked really hard, really good man to man coverage. Had some big interceptions against, like, my favorite is against Florida. The one hand interception almost touches the ground. Just a great player. And I thought the secondary, ranked kind of really low on passing yards per game, but still got it together when needed. And they
Mm-hmm.
still made some big plays, created some big turnovers throughout the season, showed exceptional potential and hype as well. And that was just a group of the team that you kind of didn't hear too much noise about, if that makes sense. And so I was still proud of them. Like you said, Isaiah Hamilton with a big way to stand off against Duke. I thought Trey Washington had a pretty good year, especially with the experience that he had at Ole Miss. So I gave A minus. I thought that obviously there could have been improvement. I'm not going to put too much blame on them this year for the few of the losses. It sucks though. You talk about the Brock Vandegrift throw on fourth down. You talk about LSU not leading the game until the end of the game is over, and Garrett Nussmeier, kind of hitting Kyron Lacey and the pitcher of Jane Kennedy on the ground. It's frustrating, but I think that if we kind of just looking at corner is the hardest position in football. So I think that, in my personal opinion, but I just think that a job well done regardless. They came in, handled business when needed, and I still thought that they played their butts off this year. And a few of those guys are going to get drafted, and I'm excited to see what they do in the future. But it's going to be a big piece of the portal for us this offseason. I mean, we're playing, Ole Miss is playing a lot of great quarterbacks in 2025, and we're going to need secondary to help move forward with that as well.
Yeah, but between Garrett Nussmeier, Lenore Sellers, DJ Lagway, the dudes are coming back. A lot of these teams are having their version of what Ole Miss had in 2024 in terms of like the last dance, whatever you want to call it. But that secondary's got to be ready to go because those dudes can absolutely sling it. The last position group, excuse me, I have a little post-it note here because Dalen reminded me that we should give some credit to special teams. So I hope you guys all enjoy this.
Okay, yeah.
Bang! Come on. Agreeing on the last one too, Day. How about that? But look, Caden Davis, we're grouping this together in terms of kickoff, punt, everything, and field goals. But I believe he single-handedly really extended the lead and won you the game against Georgia.
Yep.
But then you go and look at LSU, and it was either the first or second drive, and he can't make a field goal when you need it the most. But on the flip side of that, in overtime, he nails like a 50-yarder at LSU. So a lot of things that didn't make sense. You can go. It's easy to check out the Kentucky loss when he doesn't make. I think it was a 40-something yarder. I can't remember, maybe even 30. But he shanked it to the left. It wasn't even close. There were highs and there were lows. When you balance it out, that's what I give you the B there. And then I want to talk about the punt returns. It was interesting with Micah Davis and Jordan Watkins trying to figure out who's really going to be the guy. And then Micah Davis, I believe he muffs one against Florida, and it
Yep.
kind of changes a lot in that game. So I can't give special teams an A. There weren't a lot of returns that were like, oh my gosh, this guy looks like Devin Hester. Like I didn't say that a lot this year, but it was nothing, eye opening. I thought college kickers sometimes miss some kicks, and at the same time, sometimes they make some really good ones, and that's what you got out of Caden Davis.
Yeah, man, it's weird. I, Caden won us that Georgia game, in my opinion. Puts up 15 points, but like you said, there are moments that I saw him do really well last year that I thought he could have been better in a lot of moments. I don't put the Kentucky moment on his own. I know I get it. He shanked it really bad, but that position shouldn't even been on his hands. The
Correct.
LSU first missed field goal sucks really bad, and you kind of question things. But you watch a lot of great kickers, and they do that, man. Like they just do it, and it happens. And we kind of just have to move forward and have to take what's advantage of us. But talking about the special teams in more of a whole, Fraser Mason, I thought he struggled really, really bad the first 4 games of the season and got us together a little bit after the Kentucky game. I want to give my props to him. He struggled really bad the first 5 games, in my opinion. We got it together, especially late in the season. It was very pivotal for us. The punt returns were questionable, like Zach said. Micah Davis with a muff punt against Florida, which puts them in their own territory, and they end up scoring on that drive. It was questionable. I thought Micah Davis kind of fit the role a little bit, but then you talk about Jordan Watkins again, battle with injuries a lot, especially throughout the first part of the season, and he was that guy, the punt return position. So. It's a do or die kind of thing, and the kickoff returns didn't see much of it anyways, and you really don't nowadays. But
Yeah.
I gave it a B. I think obviously there was room for improvement, but I still thought they did a decent job this year. And I think moving forward, that's a big part of the game, though. I mean, when we talk about football, but there's still 3 parts of the game: offense, defense, and special teams. Special teams matter just as much as offense and defense. So we'll move forward with that and see how we move forward. We've already recruited a kicker. I'm going blank on his name off the top of my head, but I'm glad we've gotten that out the way. Now that Cade Davis will be gone, and we're moving forward in terms of understanding what we need. Like, I mean, that's big. Like, I thought Lane, this was one of my things with Lane this year. Just doing too much on 4th down sometimes instead of just going out there and attempting a field goal for 3 points. But he did it against Georgia, and it puts us 15 points up, and we win that game. So that'll be on the coaching staff next year as well. But I thought the special teams, I gave him a B, and I think that there's definitely still room for improvement moving forward.
Yeah, taking 3 points, it's gotta happen a little more often next year. What in the hell happened in the first drive of the Gator Bowl, Dylan? Do you remember that play?
I really don't want to. I genuinely don't know. It was the worst fake field goal play. I don't know what to call. I don't even know if it's technically can be resembled as a fake field goal, but it was bad. It really was, and I'm glad that we ended up going out there and dominating and winning the game. Because if we ended up losing, oh my gosh, I can see the way social
Dude,
media would have reacted to that moment. They already did, but now that we won, it kind of has gone down the
yeah.
drain a little bit. But it was bad. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't know why. Especially my thing is when you do stuff like that, my innate mind goes to Iron Bowl 2013 and Chris Davis returning the 100-yard kick. Alabama does that, and the only reason he gets up the field and scores that game-winning touchdown is because there's a bunch of big dudes on the field who can't chase him down. And that same
Mhm.
moment against Duke was, why are we doing this when there's half of the guys out there are offensive linemen who can't run down the field? So it's just situational awareness. I don't really prefer doing stuff like that really ever unless it's absolutely needed. Because when we have a bunch of big guys out there, they're not going to be able to run down the field and catch a secondary or a DB type of guy. So I don't get why we did that. But again, I really 2024 for me. I just really hope was a learning experience from Lane Kiffin for this coaching staff in terms of what we need to do moving forward if we want to win more football games.
And I'm hoping, it heightened the awareness of the team that you can play a team like Kentucky and lose, and it can ruin your entire season. A loss in September, the College Football Playoff Committee has shown us, weighs a lot,
Yes.
and it weighs a lot, even if your team's playing well at the end of the season. But obviously, the loss to Florida ruined everything. We know that. But Dalen said it. This is a learning experience. Ole Miss had all the hype in the world as a top five, top six team in the nation for preseason. I think that everyone in the locker room got a firsthand look at what it's like to ultimately be given every single ounce of rat poison on social media, whether it be, hearing about how good the team's going to be, whether it be Jackson Dart listening to him potentially being a Heisman, Walter Nolan being a potential first round pick. Everything was out there. I thought they handled it nicely, but obviously could have done a little better, dropping games to Kentucky and Florida. And I even think we should have won that LSU game. But you got to learn, you got to move forward and assemble a team who you believe can get to that 12-team playoff and make a run for it, because anyone can do it, man. SMU and Indiana are getting their feet wet in there. I have no doubt that Ole Miss can do the same, Dylan. Other than that, man, that's really all I got. I hope you guys enjoyed this. We wanted to have some fun writing on the paper and stuff like that, keeping you guys engaged. But make sure to leave comments, questions, anything you guys want answered heading into the off season, heading into the 2025 season with transfer portal stuff still going on. Dylan, anything else, man?
We want to hear you guys what you think the position rankings were. So leave your position ranking grades in the comments of this video. We want to hear what we want to see and read what you
I'm
guys thought
curious.
of your own. Literally, I want to see what you guys thought your position grades were. Moving in 2025 now, the off season is here. We kind of go into basketball and baseball season now, and but keep up to date with us. A lot of transfer news obviously is happening. A lot of recruiting news in general is still happening as well. So there's still so much to talk about in terms of football. So keep up to date with us. We're moving as quickly as we possibly can. And it's going to be a joyride, literally. I'm so excited for this time. Hopefully we get a fun springtime as well for this football team. So I'm excited, and thank you guys for a great 2024 Ole Miss football season.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Stay tuned to our YouTube, our website at therebelwalk.com. Appreciate you guys listening. Hotty toddy. Go Rebs. Thanks, Dylan.
Howdy toddy, y'all.